In the aftermath of the Second Samnite War, the Romans acted as if they had already conquered both Etruria and Samnium. They would send armies to roam freely across their territory and settle colonies where they pleased. The Samnites could see the writing on the wall. If they didn't act soon, they would be reduced to a footnote in history, as just another Italian tribe that was swept away by the Romans. When a Samnite army invaded Lucania, the Lucanians requested a closer alliance with Rome to guarantee their safety. This was accepted by the Senate, and envoys were sent into Samnium to request that their armies be withdrawn immediately. The envoys were dismissed with a threat of violence, and a war was declared. Thus the third and the last Samnite War started in 298 BCE. A year prior, the Etruscans had already provoked Rome to war when they bribed a Gallic tribe to help them invade Rome. The Gauls took the gold and returned home, leaving Etruscans to fend for themselves. Rome was again fighting a war on two fronts, but by now Romans could easily field two great armies. Livy states that the first consul, Scipio Barbatus, grandfather of the famous Scipio Africanus, marched his forces into Etruria and there won a decisive victory near Volterra. He then avoided fortified towns and his army was free to pillage the countryside. The second consul, Gnaeus Fulvius, marched his forces into Samnium and plundered Aufidana without much resistance from the Samnites. Interestingly, the tomb of Scipio Barbatus survived to this day. It was constructed some 150 years after these events. On the sarcophagus, there is an inscription describing his deeds, and none of it mentions anything about Etruria. It rather describes his invasion into Samnium from the east and his actions in Lucania. This inscription predates Livy, so we can assume it's more credible. There is evidence that Scipio Barbatus was serving in Etruria in 295 BCE, so perhaps some of his accomplishments in Etruria belong to that year. But for now, we should return to the story as told by Livy. In 297 BCE, Romans were preparing for war and looked to their best commander, Fabius Maximus Rullianus, by now an old man and a seasoned general. Fabius was reluctant to take up the post of consul due to his old age, but the people were keen to have him in command. He cited a law forbidding a man to serve as consul within 10 years of his last elections, but the tribunes made an exemption for him and he was unanimously elected. Accepting his post, he made an appeal to the people to elect Publius Decius Mus, son of the famous Decius who devoted himself in the Latin War, as his colleague. The two men had previously served together and had an amicable relationship. The people accepted his proposal and Decius was elected as the second consul. Hearing that the Etruscans were preparing to offer peace, both consuls marched their armies into Samnium. They fought several skirmishes that went in their favor, but there is no record of any large battles being fought that year. The consuls spent the rest of the year plundering Samnite fields. After the end of the campaigning season, Fabius returned to Rome and organized the next elections. People were expecting a big clash with the Samnites sooner or later, so they once more wanted to elect Fabius. He again rejected in fear of setting a dangerous precedent. This time the people gave in and in his place elected Appius Claudius of the Appian Way and a plebeian Lucius Volumnius. While this was happening, his colleague Decius was still serving as proconsul in Samnium. He dislodged the large Samnite army led by Gellius and Attius, who refused to fight the Romans and fled into Etruria. There he met with Etruscan leaders and implored them to keep fighting against Rome. This time, almost all Etruscan towns agreed to join the fighting and an alliance was formed. The Umbrians also joined this alliance, and even the Gauls living in the Po Valley were employed as mercenaries. Together, these four nations would wage a war against Rome, which would determine the fate of Italy. Appius Claudius was sent to Etruria and Volumnius to Samnium. The Samnite army was still abroad, so Volumnius proceeded to plunder the land. But then he received a message from Etruria. Appius was in danger and he required his help immediately. Volumnius packed up his camp and marched his forces to Etruria with great haste. When he arrived at the camp, Appius was furious. Being a proud patrician, he rejected the notion that he would ever request help from a mere plebeian. Insulted, Volumnius turned to leave, but he was stopped by the army. Exhausted and in bad shape, they begged him to stay and help them. Seeing that the army was indeed in dire need, he swallowed his pride and submitted his forces to Appius. Ecstatic, the army rushed out of the camp to attack the enemy immediately. It just so happened that the Samnite general was out with a foraging party and his army was not prepared for a sudden onslaught. On the other hand, the consuls didn't have enough time to arrange their troops into formation, and an all-around sloppy battle was fought. In the end, the Romans won and scattered the Samnite force. After the victory, Volumnius was dispatched to Campania to deal with the Samnite raiding party. Whilst he was chasing that army laden with plunder, the Samnite army in Etruria regrouped under Gellius and Attius. They were then joined by the Etruscans, the Umbrians, and the Gauls. Reports of this massive army caused great panic in Rome. Every free man in the city who could carry a sword was armed, and preparations to defend the city were made. The panic was eased a little when reports of Volumnius' success reached them. When the elections rolled around, Volumnius was recalled to administer them. Before the voting commenced, he gave a speech about the poor state of things in Etruria and ensured the people that if Fabius Maximus Rullianus was not elected, he would nominate him as dictator at once. Now the whole of the Roman populace looked up to Fabius as their savior, and he again accepted the consulship and requested that Decius served alongside him. This was agreed, and in 295 BCE, Fabius and Decius were elected as consuls together for the third time. Volumnius continued to serve as proconsul and Appius as praetor. Other former consuls, including Scipio Barbatus, served as propraetors. At least 6 different armies could be identified this year, and some authors suppose that the Romans fielded as many as 100,000 men in total. The patrician senators were keen to send Fabius, one of their number, to Etruria without drawing the lots. This did not sit well with Decius, and he protested. Fabius claimed that it was he who created a path through the previously impassable Ciminian forest, and that it should be he who continued the war on that front. In the end, the people settled the matter by sending Fabius to Etruria. There Fabius learned that the state of the matter was far worse than anyone realized. An enormous 4-nation army was looming large in the area, and the men were scared for their lives. He decided to tear down his camp and reposition his army as frequently as possible. When the winter passed without incident, he returned to Rome, gave a solemn report to the Senate, and requested that Decius and his army move into Etruria to aid him. Although their relationship was soured, Decius agreed to help his colleague and marched his forces into Etruria. Both armies set up their camp near Sentinum in preparation for the battle. In the Samnite camp, it was agreed that the Gauls and the Samnites would engage the Romans, while the Etruscans and Umbrians attacked their camp. They believed that the Romans would see that their camp was taken and there was no possibility for retreat. This would then break their morale and they would scatter. Unfortunately for them, some Gallic deserters relayed this information to Fabius. The consul then sent orders to a neighboring army to start pillaging the Etruscan countryside. The Etruscan army could not stand by while their homeland was being ravaged, and they abandoned the camp in pursuit of the Roman raiders. It's unclear what happened to the Umbrians, but it appears they also left before the battle. Fabius decided it was time to strike now, with the Samnite coalition weakened, and the 2 armies took to the field. Fabius commanded the left flank opposite the Samnites, and Decius commanded the Roman right opposite the Gauls. This was the largest battle fought in Italy at the time. Some estimates put the number of troops at 40,000 men on each side. Livy states that the armies were so evenly matched that if the Etruscans were present at the time, the Romans would surely be defeated. The 2 Roman commanders had different approaches to commanding their respective legions. Decius, a young and ambitious man, believed the enemy could be crushed by force alone. On the other hand, Fabius, a seasoned general, knew that the enemy came on strong at first, but could not sustain that level of fighting for long. His only goal was to hold his legion against this initial onslaught. Decius, seeing that the line was not moving, ordered a chivalry charge in hope of earning everlasting glory for himself. His charge was futile, and the Gallic line could not be broken. It all ended in disaster when the horses, running away from the battle, slammed into the Roman lines. The left was on the brink of collapse, and Decius, remembering the sacrifice of his father in the Latin war, devoted himself in the same manner by charging alone into the Gallic lines. This reinvigorated his men, and they held their ground. While that was going on, Fabius noticed that the Samnites were finally starting to tire out. They were lacking the same vigor they possessed at the start of the battle. He then ordered his second line to advance. This finally broke the Samnite lines, and they made for the camp. Fabius then ordered part of his force to aid in the struggle against the Gauls, who were still standing ground, while the other part was in hot pursuit of the Samnites. The Gauls could not hold for long against the two-pronged assault, and they quickly fell. At the same time, the Samnite general Gellius Anatius was killed in front of the camp, and the camp along with all the spoils was taken shortly. Livy reports that 20,000 men were killed and a further 8,000 made prisoners, while the Romans lost around 9,000. While Fabius held a funeral for his colleague, pro-praetor Gnaeus Fulvius defeated the Etruscan army. Remnants of the Samnite force tried to retreat back to Samnium, but they were attacked by the Peligni and lost a further 1,000 men. Appius Claudius was given the command of Decius's army, and Fabius returned to Rome to celebrate a triumph. This battle marks a turning point. Although the war would last for another 5 years, the Allies could pose no significant threat to Rome. The four strongest tribes in Italy united to break Rome's domination, but they failed miserably. The writing was on the walls, and it was only a matter of time before the Romans cleared out any remnants of opposition from central Italy. At the beginning of the same year, in 295 BCE, the Romans expanded their influence into Umbria. In 294 BCE, 3 chief cities of Etruria, Volsini, Perusia, and Arretium, sued for peace and secured a 40-year truce. In 293 BCE, Lucius Papirius Cursor, son of the famous Papirius, hero of the Second Samnite War, and Spurius Carvilius Maximus were elected consuls, and they both led their armies into Samnium. The Samnites ordered a massive levy. Every man of fighting age was ordered to appear before the general, or their life was forfeit. All of them were then summoned to Aquilonia to make their last stand. Around 40,000 men answered the call. In Aquilonia, the Samnites organized a great ritual sacrifice. When it was complete, the general summoned the foremost men among the Samnite nobles. They were then forced to swear an oath to fight until death and kill any man they saw fleeing. Any man who refused was killed and left as an example to others. These men were then ordered to pick their brothers in arms until they reached a number of 16,000 men in total. They formed an elite unit known as the Linen Legion. They were given special equipment to distinguish them from the rest of the army. The consuls parted way in Samnium and besieged different cities. Papirius was the first to reach Aquilonia, and he stationed his troops near the city. He decided to engage the enemy before his colleague, who was stationed some 20 miles away at Cominium, could aid him. Before the battle started, Papirius ordered Spurius Nautius, leader of the auxiliary cohorts, to lead his men along with pack animals to circle the enemy and raise as large a dust cloud as possible in the process. The fighting that ensued was savage, as both armies were highly motivated. When the second line was exhausted and starting to falter, a large dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Taking the opportunity, Papirius loudly exclaimed that his colleague Carvilius was coming to their aid. The Romans were invigorated by this, and they rose a great battle shout, while the Samnites lost their resolve and started to panic. Spurius Nautius, who created the cloud of dust, charged his auxiliaries, and the Samnite army was utterly destroyed. Volumnius, who commanded the Roman left, led his men into the Samnite camp and took it with ease, while Scipio Barbatus, who commanded the Roman right, led his men to Aquilonia. The defenders manned the walls and were ready to shower the Romans with arrows, but Scipio ordered his men in a testudo formation and took the city by storm. The Samnites lost upwards of 20,000 men on that day. While this was going on, Carvilius took Cominium and the Roman victory was complete. Samnites had no more standing armies, and the consuls proceeded to take several towns in the area without contest. Upon their return to Rome, they celebrated a great triumph. Lavish equipment taken from the Linen Legion was truly a sight to behold. With this victory, Livy ends the 10th book of his nominal work, From the Founding of the City, which we used as the primary source in all of our videos. Unfortunately, books 11 through 20 are lost to history, and only short epitomes survive to this day. This means that we won't be able to follow his versions of events any longer. Instead, we will have to rely more on our other ancient sources, namely Polybius, Plutarch, Dio Cassius, and many others. In the aftermath of the Battle of Aquilonia, the Samnites were all but defeated. With a short delay, attributed to a plague raging in Rome, in 291 BCE, Romans captured Bovianum and Venusia, two large population centers. 290 BCE was spent dealing with remaining pockets of resistance across Samnium, thus ending the third and the last Samnite War. In the same year, the Romans also conquered the Sabines. When the First Samnite War started in 343 BCE, it was a conflict between similarly matched Italian tribes vying for control of rich Greek colonies in Campania. But by the end of the Third Samnite War, some 50 years later, Rome transformed into a chief power in Italy, controlling half the peninsula. These victories set them on an inevitable course that would end in a fight for supremacy over the Mediterranean. Although Samnites were soundly defeated, they would never forget their history. When Pyrrhus of Epirus invaded Italy, they joined his forces. When Hannibal crossed the Alps, they allied with him. When the Social War broke out, they were quick to join the rebels. But time after time, they were defeated by the Romans. With each defeat, they would lose a part of their resolve and a part of their identity, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. Having defeated the Samnites and secured control of central Italy, the Romans now turned to the south and the rich cities of Magna Graecia. Although separated from the mainland, they still had both military and financial support from Greece. When Pyrrhus of Epirus answered the call to help the Greeks against an Italic tribe, he boarded his ships and set sail to Italy expecting an easy victory. Join us next time as we discuss the Pyrrhic War. Lavish equipment taken from the Linen Legion, lavish equipment taken from the Linen Legion, lavish equipment, lavish equipment, lavish equipment, lavish equipment, was truly a sight to behold.